grown-up looks really exhausting. It must be so hard." The girl couldn't have been older than 9. She sat across from a stranger in the company cafeteria, chin resting in both palms, sighing with a heaviness that didn't belong to someone her age. The woman across the table looked up from her coffee and smiled. The easy, polite smile of someone who didn't expect the conversation to go anywhere meaningful. That politeness didn't last. "My dad works every single night," the girl continued, eyes fixed on the table as though she was talking to herself as much as anyone. "He gets home after I'm already asleep, every night, and he still doesn't make enough money." She said the last part softly, the way someone does when they've rehearsed it enough times to get through it without crying. "When he got hired here, they told him they'd take care of people like him, people doing it alone. They made it sound like a real promise." The woman set her cup down. "But it wasn't," the girl said. "It was just something they said." She looked up finally, and there was no anger in her face, only the worn, colorless disappointment of someone who had already finished grieving. "I guess that's just how adults are. Their promises don't mean anything." The woman started to say something, then didn't. The girl had already gone back to picking at the edge of her napkin, small fingers folding and unfolding the paper corners, quietly waiting for a father who wouldn't appear for another 3 hours. What the girl didn't know, couldn't have known, was that the woman sitting across from her had personally signed the policy that was supposed to protect her father. Her name was Diana Mercer. She was the CEO of this company, and she had just heard enough. If you've ever believed in a promise that turned out to mean nothing, this story is for you. Subscribe and follow the channel so you never miss a story worth your time. Diana Mercer had not planned to eat in the cafeteria that afternoon. She had a standing habit of taking lunch at her desk, a container of something her assistant ordered, eaten in the 15 minutes between back-to-back calls while she read through whatever report needed her attention by end of day. It was efficient. It was also, she would admit to no one, deeply lonely. But efficiency had been the organizing principle of her life for long enough that she'd stopped noticing the loneliness the way you stop noticing a low hum in the walls. She'd come down today only because the elevators were being serviced on the executive floor and the stairs had left her on the wrong level. The cafeteria was there. She was hungry. She sat down. That was how it happened. No grand design, just a detour. She was 51 years old and she had built Mercer Consolidated from a mid-sized logistics firm into one of the 10 largest private employers in the state. She was known in industry circles as someone who made decisions fast and rarely reversed them. What fewer people knew, because she didn't publicize it, was that the policy she was most proud of had nothing to do with revenue or market share. 3 years ago, she had spent 6 weeks drafting what the HR department now called the Single Parent Support Initiative. It guaranteed overtime pay at double the standard rate for any employee classified as a single parent or primary caregiver. It allowed flexible early departure with no managerial pressure when a documented family need arose. It included a direct reporting line to HR leadership, bypassing middle management entirely so that anyone who felt the policy was being ignored could say so without fear. She had written most of it herself. She had argued for it in front of the board when 2 members called it a financial liability. She had signed it on a Wednesday morning and gone home that night feeling for the first time in years that she had done something that mattered outside of a quarterly earnings call. She thought about that policy sometimes, the way you think about something you're quietly proud of, a small, private satisfaction. She was thinking about nothing in particular when the girl sat down across from her. The cafeteria at Mercer Consolidated was large and usually loud. The clattering of trays, the overlapping conversations of a few hundred employees on staggered lunch breaks. Diana had chosen a corner table out of habit. The girl appeared without warning, carrying a cup of juice and a small bag of crackers, and simply sat down as though the seat had been saved for her. Diana looked up. The girl was young, 9, maybe 10 at the outside. She wore a school backpack she hadn't bothered to take off, and she had the specific kind of self-possession that belongs to children who have spent a lot of time around adults and learned to move quietly through their world. "Hi," Diana said. "Hi," the girl said back without looking up. She opened her crackers. Diana returned to her coffee. She assumed the girl was waiting for someone. She assumed correctly, though she didn't yet know what that waiting looked like from the inside. The practiced patience of a child who had learned that her father would always be later than he said, not because he wanted to be, but because he had no other choice. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. Then the girl sighed, not dramatically, but with the full weight of something she'd been carrying for a while, and said, almost to herself, "Being a grown-up looks really exhausting. It must be so hard." Diana looked at her. "Some days," she said carefully. "Why do you ask?" The girl shrugged one shoulder. "I'm just thinking about my dad." She said it the way children say things they mean deeply but haven't yet learned to protect. Openly, without armor, the words sitting right on the surface. Diana waited. "He works every night," the girl said. "He gets home after I'm already asleep. I know because I try to stay awake and I never can." She paused. "And he doesn't make enough money." "I know he doesn't because I heard him on the phone once, talking to someone about bills, and he said—" She stopped, folded the edge of her cracker bag over once, precisely. "He said he didn't know how he was going to make it work." Diana said nothing. There was nothing to say to that wouldn't be inadequate. "The thing that's weird," the girl continued, "is that when he got hired at his job, they told him they'd help him. Because he's doing it by himself, raising me. They said there was a special thing for people like him, that he'd get paid more for working extra hours, and that he wouldn't have to worry so much." She looked up for the first time, directly at Diana. Her eyes were steady and a little too old. "They said it like it was a promise." "And it wasn't?" Diana asked. "No." The girl said it flatly, not dramatically, just the plain weight of a conclusion she'd already arrived at. "Because if it was real, he wouldn't be this tired. He wouldn't be eating less than me." She looked back down at her crackers. "I guess that's just how adults are. They say things, and then they don't mean them." She wasn't crying. That was almost worse. The fact that she'd moved past the stage of crying about it and arrived somewhere quieter and more settled. A 9-year-old who had already made her peace with being lied to. Diana's hand was still on her coffee cup. She became aware suddenly of exactly how still she'd gone. In the moment that followed, Diana ran through the possibilities quickly, the way her mind always worked, systematically, without sentiment. The girl was a child. Children misunderstood things. Perhaps her father had miscommunicated the terms of his benefits, or she'd overheard something and filled in the gaps incorrectly. Perhaps there was a simpler explanation. A payroll error, a misclassification, something clerical that had already been flagged and was being corrected. She almost convinced herself of that. She was very good at finding the path of least disruption. But then the girl said something that made the path disappear entirely. "He's worked here for almost 2 years, she said, still looking at her crackers. "He showed me the paper they gave him when he started, the one that said they'd take care of him because he's a single dad." She smoothed the cracker bag with the flat of her hand. "He kept it. He keeps it in the drawer by the kitchen. I think he looks at it sometimes." Diana knew that paper. She had written that paper. She had approved every line of it, argued over the precise language of 3 separate clauses, and signed her name at the bottom in the particular way she signed things that mattered. Slowly, deliberately, like a commitment rather than a formality. "Which floor does your dad work on?" Diana asked. Her voice came out very calm. She had learned long ago to keep her voice calm when her mind was moving fast. "The distribution floor," the girl said. "He's been there since he started." She looked up again, mildly curious. "Do you work here too?" "Yes," Diana said. "I do." The girl nodded, unsurprised, and went back to her juice. Diana sat with that for a moment. She could stand up, go back upstairs, and begin making calls. She could treat this as a process. Open an inquiry, assign it to HR, let the mechanism she'd built handle it. That was the appropriate response. That was how a CEO handled an employee concern. But something about the way the girl had said, "He keeps it in the drawer by the kitchen," the quiet faith in that detail, The fact that a man who had every reason to be bitter had held on to a piece of paper as though it still meant something made the appropriate response feel like the wrong one. Diana made a decision, not the kind that went through channels, the kind she made herself. She finished her coffee, said a quiet goodbye to the girl, who gave a small wave without looking up, already back inside whatever private world 9-year-olds retreat to when adults stop being interesting, and walked back to the elevator with a single thought moving through her like a current. Someone in this building had taken something she built to protect people and used it to hurt them instead. She intended to find out exactly who. She started with the records. That was always where you started. Not with people, because people adjusted their stories depending on who was asking, but with paper, which didn't know enough to lie. Diana requested the full employment files for every single parent classified under the initiative on the distribution floor, along with overtime logs and payroll summaries going back 18 months. She made the request herself, directly, without explaining why, in the tone she used when she didn't want questions. The files arrived within the hour. She spent that evening at her desk going through them with the methodical attention she usually reserved for acquisition documents, payroll records, timesheets, overtime logs cross-referenced against the official rate schedule, and at the bottom of each folder, a copy of the Single Parent Support Initiative Acknowledgement Form, signed by each employee on their first week, confirming they understood the terms of the policy. On the surface, everything was in order. That was the first thing that struck her. Not that something was obviously wrong, but that everything was so precisely, immaculately right. Every form filled out, every signature in place, every number accounted for in a way that, if you looked at it quickly, looked like compliance. Diana did not look at things quickly. She pulled out a calculator and began working backward from the logged overtime hours. The distribution floor's single-parent employees had worked on average between 58 and 65 hours per week over the past 14 months. Under standard company policy, anything above 40 hours was overtime, paid at time and a half. Under the Single Parent Support Initiative, the policy she had signed, their overtime should have been paid at double rate. She ran the numbers twice. What they had actually received was roughly 1/3 of what they were owed, some slightly above, some slightly below, but every single file falling within the same narrow band. The variation was small enough to look like normal payroll fluctuation. It was large enough, across 11 employees over 14 months, to represent a significant and deliberate theft. The paperwork in each case was spotless. The signature lines were full. The forms were dated, witnessed, filed correctly. Someone had gone to a great deal of trouble to make theft look like administration. Diana closed the last folder, set her pen down on the desk, and sat very still in the way she did when she was angry enough that stillness became necessary. She knew whose name was on the distribution floor's management chain. Greg Holloway, floor operations manager, 7 years with the company, 2 performance commendations in his file, a reputation among his team as someone who ran a tight ship. She had never had cause to think about him specifically. He was, in the organizational chart, 3 levels below her, the kind of manager who existed in the middle distance of a company her size, visible only when something went wrong. Something had gone very wrong. But before she moved on Holloway, she needed to hear it from someone on the inside directly. Not because the numbers weren't clear, they were, but because she needed to understand exactly how it had happened. Paper told you what, people told you how, and the how, she suspected, was going to be worse than the what. She arranged the meeting quietly. She didn't use her assistant and she didn't go through HR. She pulled the name from the distribution floor roster. Marcus Webb, 2 years on record, single-parent classification, one of the 11, and sent a brief message through the internal system asking him to come to a small conference room on the 2nd floor the following morning before his shift began. She kept it short because she didn't want to give him time to prepare a performance. She wanted the truth, and the truth came easiest when people didn't have time to decide how much of it to tell. He arrived 4 minutes early. She noted that. Marcus Webb was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with the kind of physical presence that suggested he had once carried himself with considerable ease, and was now, through long habit, making himself smaller than he was. He wore a clean work shirt, tucked in. His hands, when he sat down across from her, were folded on the table with careful deliberateness. The hands of someone who had learned that how you held your body in a room like this mattered. He recognized her immediately. She could tell by the brief stillness that passed across his face before he composed it. "Mr. Webb," she said, "thank you for coming." "Yes, ma'am," he said, careful, neutral. She slid the payroll summary across the table toward him. She didn't explain it. She let him look at it for a moment, watched his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly as he understood what he was reading, and then she asked, "Can you tell me in your own words how this happened?" The silence that followed was long enough that she began to think he might not answer at all. She had seen that before. Employees so conditioned to the risk of speaking that even a direct question from the top of the organization felt like a trap rather than an opening. Then he looked up. "He called us in one at a time," Marcus said. His voice was low and even. "About 3 months after I started. Said there were some changes to how overtime was being processed. That the company had decided the support policy was being," he used the word, "supplemented. That we'd be receiving a portion of the overtime rate directly, and the rest would be held back as what he called an administrative offset." He paused. I asked him what that meant. He said it meant the company was covering additional costs associated with managing employees who required special accommodations. Diana kept her expression neutral, barely. "I told him that wasn't what my paperwork said," Marcus continued. "He agreed. He said the paperwork reflected an earlier version of the policy and that it had since been updated internally." A long pause. "Then he said that if I wanted to escalate the concern, I was welcome to do that, but that in his experience, employees who created HR complications for their department tended to find themselves moved to less stable positions." Marcus looked at the table for a moment. He said it gently, like he was giving me advice. And then he said that he understood I was in a difficult situation, raising a child on my own. That he respected that, but that the job market for someone with the word took a moment to arrive, profile wasn't ideal. And that steady work, even at a reduced rate, was worth more than uncertainty. Diana was quiet. "So I signed the amendment," Marcus said, "the one that said I agreed to the new arrangement." He met her eyes directly for the first time. "I want you to understand something. I knew it wasn't right. I knew it the moment he said it. But my daughter was going to start 3rd grade in 3 weeks, and I needed to know I could pay for her school supplies." He did not look away. "That was what I was thinking about when I signed it. School supplies." The room was very quiet. Diana had been in 1,000 difficult meetings in her professional life. She had delivered layoffs and absorbed bad quarterly news and sat across from people whose companies she was in the process of dismantling. She knew how to keep the surface of herself still. But something about the phrase school supplies, the absolute specificity of it, the fact that this man had made a calculation in real time between his dignity and his daughter's pencils and paper, moved through her in a way she hadn't been prepared for. "Did anyone else sign?" she asked. "All of us did," Marcus said. "Every single parent on the floor. He did it one at a time, individually, so we wouldn't compare notes." He said it without bitterness, just the flat recitation of a fact he'd had a long time to sit with. A few of us figured it out eventually, that we'd all gone through the same conversation, but by then we'd all already signed. He looked at the payroll summary still sitting between them on the table. "I thought about reporting it," he said before she could ask. "I want you to know that. I started writing it up once, had 2 pages done." A pause. "Then I thought about what happened to the last person who made a complaint on that floor. She didn't get fired, nothing that obvious. She just started getting the worst shift assignments, the kind that make your life impossible in small ways, one day at a time, until you quit because you're exhausted." Marcus unfolded his hands and set them flat on the table. "I have a daughter to get home to. I can't afford to be exhausted in ways I can't control." He had not once asked for her sympathy. He was not asking for it now. He was simply telling her what had happened, in the same calm, precise way he would describe a mechanical problem on the floor. This is what I observed, this is what I concluded, this is what I did. That, more than anything else he'd said, told her who Marcus Webb was. After Marcus left, Diana spent 2 hours going through the distribution floor records again, this time looking not just at payroll, but at everything. Shift assignments, performance reviews, internal transfer requests, any HR flag that had been opened and subsequently closed without resolution. The picture that assembled itself was methodical in a way that made her stomach turn. Holloway had not acted impulsively. He had constructed something. Over the course of nearly 2 years, he had identified exactly which employees were most exposed. Single parents, employees with documented caregiving responsibilities, anyone whose circumstances made them unlikely to risk losing a steady paycheck. And he had built a private financial arrangement on top of their vulnerability, using the language of company policy as its scaffolding. The Single Parent Support Initiative had been designed as protection. Holloway had understood immediately that it could be inverted. The same policy which gave employees additional rights also gave a bad faith manager additional leverage. You have something to lose, and I control whether you lose it. The cruelty of it was in the precision. He hadn't stolen from everyone, he had stolen specifically from the people least likely to say anything. Diana found, buried in the HR system, a complaint filed 14 months ago by a woman named Sandra Cole, also a single mother, also on the distribution floor. The complaint described pressure from her floor manager to accept reduced overtime pay. It had been reviewed and closed within a week, with a note reading, "Resolved. Employee misunderstood policy terms. No action required." Sandra Cole no longer worked at the company. She had resigned 7 months ago. Her exit interview cited personal reasons. Diana thought about a woman who had tried to do the right thing, had been told she'd simply misunderstood, and had eventually left because the right thing had cost too much to keep trying for. She made a note to locate Sandra Cole and ensure she received full remediation. Every dollar withheld, returned. Whatever had driven her out of the building, she would not leave without what she was owed. Then Diana thought about Marcus Webb. 2 nights ago, after the cafeteria conversation while she was still deciding how to proceed, she had walked the distribution floor after hours, as she sometimes did when she needed to think without being visible. She had seen Marcus at the end of his shift, coming out of the distribution bay. She hadn't known yet that he was the father of the girl in the cafeteria. She'd been watching the floor generally, looking for the texture of how things actually ran when no one senior was watching. He had stopped in the hallway just outside the bay doors, tipped his back against the wall and closed his eyes. Not dramatically, not collapsing, just stopping. The way a person stops when they have reached the boundary of what they can hold upright and need 3 seconds to redistribute the weight before they continue. He had stayed like that for only a moment. Then his phone buzzed. He straightened, read the screen, and smiled. A real smile, unguarded, the kind that doesn't perform anything because no one is supposed to be watching. He typed something back quickly and pushed off the wall and kept walking. She hadn't known in that moment who he was. She knew now. And what she understood, looking at his file, at the numbers, at 14 months of a man showing up every day to a system that was quietly stealing from him while he smiled at messages from his daughter, was this. He had not been broken by it. He had not been defeated. He had made a calculation every single morning, deliberately and without complaint, about how much of himself he could spend and still have enough left over to be present when it mattered. He had held the weight of injustice in one hand and his daughter's stability in the other, and he had chosen her stability every time, without anyone ever knowing the choice was being made. That was not weakness. That was the most expensive kind of strength there was, and it had been used against him by a man who understood exactly how much Marcus Webb loved his daughter and had priced his theft accordingly. Diana picked up her phone. There was one more conversation she needed to have, and it was not going to be a pleasant one. She gave him no warning. That was a deliberate choice. Greg Holloway had demonstrated across nearly 2 years of careful construction that he was very good at preparation, at arranging surfaces, filling in signatures, producing documentation that said exactly what he needed it to say. Diana had no intention of giving him time to arrange anything. She had him called to the executive conference room on a Tuesday morning, 40 minutes before his shift began, with no explanation beyond that his presence was required. She was already seated when he arrived, the full set of files arranged in a neat stack in the center of the table. Payroll records, overtime logs, the 11 amended agreements, Sandra Cole's closed complaint. Holloway was a compact man in his mid-40s, with the confident, unhurried manner of someone who believed he had never been caught at anything because he was too careful to be caught. He walked in, took in the room, took in Diana, took in the files, and sat down across from her with the expression of a man who had decided, in the 10 steps between the door and the chair, that whatever this was, he could manage it. "Ms. Mercer," he said pleasantly. Diana didn't return the pleasantry. She opened the top folder, turned it to face him, and set it on the table between them. "I'd like you to walk me through this," she said. He looked at it for a moment. His expression didn't change. "Of course. These are the overtime reconciliation records for the distribution floor. I can explain I've already explained them to myself," Diana said. "What I'd like from you is something different. I'd like you to explain to me how 11 employees, all of them classified as single parents or primary caregivers under our support initiative, came to receive roughly 1/3 of their legally owed overtime compensation over a period of 14 months. A pause. Very brief, almost imperceptible. "There was an administrative restructuring of how supplemental pay was processed," Holloway said. "The employees were informed of the change and signed updated agreements confirming their understanding. All of the documentation is in order." "I've seen the documentation," Diana said. "I'd like to talk about what happened before the documentation." Another pause, slightly longer. "I'm not sure I follow." "I think you do." Diana leaned forward slightly, not aggressively, but with the particular stillness of someone who has decided exactly where this conversation is going and is in no hurry to get there. "I've spoken with several of your employees. I've heard in considerable detail how those meetings were conducted. What was said about job security? What was said about the difficulty of finding employment for people with certain—" She let the word sit. "Profiles. I've read Sandra Cole's HR complaint. I've noted how quickly it was closed and by whom." Holloway's pleasant expression had not disappeared, but it had, very subtly, rearranged itself into something more careful. "Employee concerns are always—" "Greg." She said his first name simply, without heat. "I'm not looking for your process language. I'm asking you directly to explain to me how you looked at a policy designed to protect the most vulnerable people in this building. People raising children alone, people without safety nets, people who could not afford to fight back, and decided that their vulnerability was something you could build a revenue stream on." The pleasant expression was gone now. Holloway was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted, not into guilt, but into a different kind of steadiness. The steadiness of a man who had prepared at some point for the possibility of this conversation. "Those employees were a cost burden," he said. "The overtime rates under the initiative were significantly above market. The administrative offset was a practical solution to maintain staffing levels while managing departmental budget pressures. Everyone signed. No one was forced." He met her eyes. "And frankly, those employees should understand that a guaranteed position in this job market, even at a modified rate, is more than most people with their backgrounds and limitations can expect." The room was silent. Diana looked at him for a long moment without speaking. She had expected the financial justification. She had expected the procedural defense. She had not expected him to say the quiet part out loud, to sit across from her and articulate, without apparent discomfort, that the reason this had been possible was that he believed the people he'd stolen from deserved less to begin with, that their vulnerability was not a circumstance to be addressed, but a permanent condition to be managed. That a man working 60 hours a week to feed his daughter should be grateful for whatever portion of his wages he was permitted to keep. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for being direct." She closed the folder. "You're being placed on immediate administrative suspension effective this morning, pending a formal disciplinary review. HR will be in contact with the terms. Please leave your access badge with reception on your way out." He stared at her. For the first time since he'd walked in, something behind his eyes shifted. Not remorse, but the particular shock of a man who had badly miscalculated how serious the person across from him was willing to be. "Ms. Mercer." "That's all," Diana said. She spent the rest of the morning in back-to-back meetings with HR leadership and the company's legal team, moving with the focused velocity her executive team recognized as the mode she operated in when something mattered more than efficiency. By noon, the structure of the response was in place. Holloway's termination was formally processed by end of day, not suspended, not transferred, not quietly managed out over a period of weeks. Terminated with documentation for breach of fiduciary responsibility, wage theft, and deliberate exploitation of company policy. Diana insisted the documentation use all three phrases. She did not want anyone reviewing that file in the future to be uncertain about what had occurred. The financial remediation came next. A full audit of every overtime record on the distribution floor going back to the month the first amended agreement had been signed. Every dollar that had been withheld, from Marcus Webb, from the 10 other employees, from Sandra Cole for the month she had worked before leaving, was calculated, verified, and scheduled for distribution. The team located Sandra within 48 hours. She received the same letter and the same back payment as everyone else. She was also offered the option to return. She didn't take it, but she was offered it, because that too was something she was owed. The payment to each employee was not categorized as a settlement or a discretionary bonus. It was formally recorded as back wages owed, a debt the company was correcting, not a favor it was extending. The letter that accompanied each payment was one Diana wrote herself. It was short. It said that the company had identified a significant failure in the administration of the single-parent support initiative, that the enclosed amount represented wages wrongfully withheld, that the company accepted full responsibility, and that steps were being taken to ensure it could not happen again. It did not use the passive voice. It did not say mistakes were made. It said, "We failed to protect you, and we are sorry." She read it over 4 times before she signed it. The third piece was the one she knew would take the longest to get right. She called a company-wide meeting, all hands, every location connected by video, and stood in front of the assembled staff of Mercer Consolidated and said plainly what had happened. Not every detail, but enough. Enough so that everyone understood that a manager had used a policy designed to protect vulnerable employees as a mechanism to exploit them. Enough so that the 11 people who had spent 14 months too afraid to say anything could hear from the person at the top of the organization that what had been done to them was wrong, that it had always been wrong, and that no financial justification made it anything other than what it was. The single-parent support initiative is not a benefit we offer at our discretion, Diana said. It is not a negotiating point. It is not something a manager can modify, suspend, or use as leverage, under any circumstances, for any reason. It is a right, and any employee who feels that right is being infringed upon has a direct line to my office. Not HR, not a department head. Me. She paused. I also want to say something about what this situation taught me. She had not written this part down. I signed a policy 3 years ago and believed that signing it was the same as protecting people. I believed that building the right structure meant the structure would hold. I was wrong. A policy is only as strong as the people responsible for living inside it. And as the person responsible for all of those people, I should have been looking closer. I wasn't. She let that sit. I am now. After the meeting, she established an independent reporting channel, a direct line outside the management hierarchy, to to a designated ombudsperson whose sole function was to receive and investigate employee concerns without routing them through the supervisory chain. She funded 2 full-time positions to staff it and announced a quarterly compliance review that she would personally sign off on. It was not a perfect system. She was clear-eyed enough to know that no system was. But it was a real one, built with the specific knowledge of exactly how the previous one had failed, and designed to close the gaps that had allowed Greg Holloway to operate undisturbed for 14 months. 3 weeks later, Marcus Webb left the building at 5:47 in the evening. It was the first time in 14 months that he had walked out before the second shift began. His back wages had been deposited the week prior. His overtime rate had been corrected in the payroll system. Going forward, he would receive exactly what he had always been owed. Nothing more, nothing less. Just what was fair. He stood for a moment on the front steps in the early evening light and breathed in the unremarkable air of a Tuesday that was ending at a normal hour. It felt strange. He thought it might feel strange for a while and that was all right. He took out his phone and sent a message to his daughter. "On my way, home by 6:15. Don't eat without me." The response came in under 10 seconds. A string of exclamation points followed by a drawing of what appeared to be a lopsided pizza, which Lily produced regularly via emoji in moments of strong feeling. He smiled. Not the restrained, private smile of a man making sure no one was watching. Just a smile, unheld, belonging to someone who had something to go home to and enough left in him to get there. He had not been saved. He had not been rescued. He was still a single father working a full-time job with a daughter in 3rd grade and a stack of bills he managed 1 month at a time. His life had not been transformed. But the weight of it, the specific, grinding weight of being treated as though he was worth less than the work he was doing, that weight was gone. And the difference between carrying what was hard and carrying what was unjust turned out to be the difference between exhaustion and something you could actually live inside. He walked to his car. Lily Webb did not know most of what had happened. She knew that her dad was coming home for dinner, which was enough. She knew that he'd seemed lighter lately. Not happy in some sudden, unfamiliar way, but easier. The way he moved through the kitchen in the mornings had changed. He asked about her school day with the kind of attention that meant he was actually listening, not just waiting for his turn to rest. She had asked him once, about a week after everything had changed, whether he was less tired. He had thought about it for a moment. "I'm still tired," he said honestly, "but it's a different kind." She hadn't entirely understood that, but she'd filed it away, to think about later, when she was older and knew more about what different kinds of tired meant. What she already understood without needing to be told was this. Her father had not been weak when he was silent. He had not been defeated when he bent. He had been carrying something alone that he should never have been asked to carry alone. And he had carried it for as long as it took, without complaint, without bitterness, without letting it show on his face when she was watching. She didn't have a word for that yet, but she recognized it when she saw it. Diana Mercer did not tell anyone about the conversation in the cafeteria. It was not the kind of thing that translated well into the language of annual reports or leadership profiles. A 9-year-old and a cup of coffee, and 12 words that had turned something over in her chest. It didn't fit neatly into the narrative of decisive executive action, and she wasn't sure she wanted it to. But she thought about it. She thought about it when she reviewed the first quarterly compliance report and found nothing irregular. She thought about it when she read the ombudsperson's monthly summary and saw that 3 concerns had been raised, reviewed, and resolved in the employee's favor. She thought about it most on a morning about a month after everything had been settled, when she came down to the cafeteria. Not because the elevators were out, but because she had decided, as a small and deliberate practice, to take lunch somewhere she might accidentally hear something that mattered. She sat in the corner. She ordered coffee. She waited. A girl had once told her that the promises adults made didn't mean anything. She had said it with the resigned certainty of someone who had already stopped expecting otherwise. Diana knew now that it wasn't enough to mean well. It wasn't enough to write the right words and sign your name and go home feeling like you'd done something good. Power didn't protect anyone by existing. It only protected people when the person holding it stayed close enough to see what was actually happening, close enough to notice, close enough to act, close enough that the gap between intention and reality had nowhere to hide. That was the hardest thing about being in charge of anything. Not the decisions, not the pressure, but the discipline of staying present to the consequences of your own good intentions. Because the moment you stopped looking, someone else would start deciding what those intentions were worth. She had learned that from a 9-year-old in a cafeteria, picking at the corners of a paper napkin, waiting for her father. Outside the window, the city moved through its ordinary Tuesday. Somewhere across town, a girl in 3rd grade was sitting in a classroom, waiting for a father who would be home before she finished her homework. The promise this time was going to hold. Stories like this one exist because there are people like Marcus who carry more than they should quietly for the people they love. If this story meant something to you, subscribe and follow the channel. Every week, we bring you stories about dignity, justice, and the small moments that change everything. It costs you nothing to follow. It means everything to keep these stories going.